In the space between rejection and recognition, between silence and howling, lives the tender brutality of a heart that refuses to break. Mira Ashfall knows the weight of absence, the phantom ache of a wolf that never came, the hollow echo where belonging should live, the particular cruelty of being deemed broken by those who should have cherished her wholeness. For 5 years, she has carried the shame of her failed transformation like a stone in her chest, each day a testament to everything she cannot be, cannot give, cannot become. In Alpha Garrett's pack, she exists in the margins, invisible until needed, silent until spoken to, useful only in her willingness to disappear. She has learned the language of unwanted things, the quick downcast of eyes, the careful shuffle of feet that make no sound, the art of taking up no space in a world that has already decided she deserves none. But on this night, when winter's teeth bite sharp through the forest air, and the darkness holds secrets older than pack law, a tiny cry will pierce through years of accepted defeat. A lost pup, abandoned and starving, will look up at her with eyes that hold no judgment, only need, only trust, only the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, might choose kindness over cruelty. What Mira cannot know, as she cradles this trembling life against her chest, is that mercy has a price, that love, even in its smallest form, calls to love in its most dangerous, that somewhere in the wilderness where exiled kings forge new kingdoms from shadow and defiance, an alpha whose heart was carved from loss and longing has caught her scent on the wind. The pup she saves will save her in return. The choice she makes in darkness will bring light crashing through her world like dawn breaking over mountains. And the woman who has spent her life believing she is not enough will discover that sometimes being everything to one soul is worth more than being nothing to many. This is the story of the Omega they scorned, and the king who claimed her, of the lost finding the lost, of the moment when a heart that has learned to expect nothing dares, against all wisdom, to hope for everything. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. The silence was what Mira heard first when she stepped into the pack house common room, not the comfortable quiet of evening meditation, but the sharp, deliberate hush that followed her wherever she went. 23 pairs of eyes turned toward her, then quickly away, as if looking too long might somehow contaminate them with her weakness. She kept her head down and moved toward the corner where the dirty dishes waited. Always the dishes, always the corners, always the tasks that no one else wanted to touch. Her bare feet whispered against the worn wooden floor, each step a reminder that even the sound of her presence was unwelcome here. "About time," muttered Lydia from her perch near the fireplace. "Those plates have been sitting there since lunch." Mira said nothing. She had learned long ago that words only made things worse. Instead, she gathered the stack of ceramic plates with practiced care, balancing them against her chest. The weight was familiar, comforting even. At least when she was working, no one expected her to speak. No one expected her to be anything more than useful. "Careful, freak," called out Marcus, one of the younger wolves who had never learned to moderate his cruelty. "We can't afford to lose more dishes because you can't even shift properly." The others laughed, sharp sounds that cut through the evening air. Mira's hands trembled slightly, but she tightened her grip on the plates. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her drop something, not tonight. It had been 5 years since her first attempt to shift. 5 years since she had stood in the center of the ceremonial circle, surrounded by her packmates, and felt nothing at all. No burning in her bones, no pull toward her wolf form, no connection to the wild spirit that should have been her birthright. Just the crushing weight of disappointment as she remained stubbornly, humiliatingly human, while every other 18-year-old in the pack transformed with grace and power. Alpha Garrett had declared her defective, a broken thing that would never be whole. Her own parents had looked at her with such shame that she sometimes wondered if they regretted not leaving her to die in the woods as an infant. After all, what use was an Omega who could not even access her most basic nature? The kitchen was mercifully empty when she arrived. Mira set the plates by the large stone sink and began the familiar ritual of scrubbing. Hot water, coarse soap, methodical movements. She let her mind drift as she worked, imagining what it might feel like to run through the forest on 4 legs, to hunt by moonlight, to belong to something larger than her own small existence. A soft whimpering sound from outside broke through her daydream. Mira froze, her hands still submerged in the soapy water. The sound came again, weak and desperate. She moved to the window and peered out into the gathering darkness. At first, she saw nothing but shadows and the edge of the forest that bordered their territory. Then movement caught her eye. A small, dark shape huddled against the base of a massive oak tree. Her heart clenched. It was a pup, no more than a few weeks old by the size of it. Its fur was matted and dirty, and even from this distance, she could see the tremor of cold and hunger racking its tiny frame. It lifted its head and let out another pitiful cry, the sound so full of loneliness that Mira felt tears spring to her eyes. She knew what she should do. Pack law was clear. Found wolves from other territories were to be reported to the Alpha immediately. They were either returned to their pack, or, if they posed a threat, eliminated. A pup this young would be seen as a burden, another mouth to feed when resources were already stretched thin. Alpha Garrett would order it left to die or killed outright. But as she watched the little creature struggle to stay upright, something deep in Mira's chest twisted with fierce protectiveness. This pup was abandoned, just as she was. Unwanted, just as she was. The pack had made it clear that they saw her as dead weight. Well, perhaps she could save one small life, even if she could not save herself. She glanced back toward the common room, where she could hear the low murmur of conversation. No one would miss her for a while. They barely noticed her presence anyway. Moving quickly, Mira dried her hands and slipped out the back door into the cool evening air. The pup looked up at her approach, its eyes wide with fear. It tried to back away, but its legs were too weak to carry it far. Mira knelt down slowly, making herself as small and non-threatening as possible. "Hey, little one," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm not going to hurt you." The pup whimpered again, but this time there was less fear in the sound. More hope. Mira extended her hand slowly, palm up, letting the creature catch her scent. After a moment of hesitation, the pup crawled forward and pressed its cold nose against her fingers. "You're so cold," she murmured, gently scooping the tiny wolf into her arms. It was barely larger than both her hands together, all bone and fur in desperate need. "And hungry too, I bet." The pup nestled against her chest, seeking warmth, and Mira felt something shift inside her. For the first time in years, she had a purpose. Someone needed her. Not her labor, not her silence, but her care, her protection. She looked around quickly, then made her decision. Her small room in the servants' quarters was isolated enough that no one would think to look for her there. She could hide the pup, at least for tonight, give it food and warmth, and figure out what to do in the morning. Mira made her way through the shadows, avoiding the main paths where other pack members might see her. Her room was sparse. A narrow bed, a small dresser, a single window that looked out toward the forest. But it was warm and private, and that was all that mattered. She settled the pup on her bed and quickly gathered what supplies she could find. A bowl of water, some leftover meat from the kitchen, an old towel to make a nest. The pup drank eagerly and devoured the food with desperate hunger. Watching it eat, Mira felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. "What are you, little one?" she asked softly, stroking the pup's now clean fur. "Where did you come from?" In the lamplight, she could see that the pup was beautiful. Its coat was an unusual silver black, with markings she did not recognize. Its eyes, when it looked up at her, seemed almost too intelligent for such a young creature. There was something otherworldly about it, something that made her skin tingle with awareness. But she pushed the feeling aside. Whatever this pup was, wherever it had come from, it was safe now. She would make sure of that, even if it meant defying her alpha, even if it meant facing punishment. She would not let this innocent creature suffer as she had suffered. The pup curled up against her side as she settled onto the bed, its tiny body warm and trusting. For the first time in months, Mira fell asleep without the familiar ache of loneliness in her chest. She did not know that outside her window, the shadows had begun to move with unnatural purpose. She did not know that far away, in a place where exile meant survival by blood and cunning, an alpha had caught a scent on the wind that made his heart race with desperate hope. And she certainly did not know that before the sun rose again, her quiet act of kindness would change the course of her life forever. Dusk came too quickly. Mira woke to the sound of howling in the distance, not the familiar calls of her packmates, but something deeper, wilder, filled with a longing that made her bones ache. The pup beside her stirred, lifting its small head with sudden alertness, Its ears were pricked forward, listening to something she could not hear. "What is it, little one?" she whispered, stroking its fur. The pup whined softly, then did something that made Mira's blood run cold. It lifted its tiny muzzle and howled back, a sound so pure and powerful that it seemed impossible such a small creature could produce it. The howl went on, rising and falling in a melody that spoke of ancient bloodlines and forgotten power. And in the distance, the forest answered. The response was thunderous, shaking the very walls of the pack house. Every wolf in the territory would have heard it, would have felt it in their bones. Mira scrambled to the window, her heart pounding, and peered out into the gathering darkness. At first, she saw nothing. Then the shadows beneath the trees began to shift and separate, revealing a figure that made her breath catch in her throat. He was massive, even in human form. Broad shoulders and long limbs spoke of power barely contained, while dark hair fell across features that were sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his eyes that held her frozen at the window, pale gold, like molten metal, burning with an intensity that seemed to pierce straight through to her soul. Alpha Ronan Valor, the exiled king, the wolf who had once ruled half the northern territories before his fall from grace, had sent him into the wilderness. She had heard stories of him, whispered tales of his strength and his rage, his refusal to bow to the council that had stripped him of his title, and he was looking directly at her. Panic flooded her system. The pup at her side let out another small howl, and understanding crashed over her like a cold wave. This was his child, his heir, the creature she had saved, sheltered, fed. It belonged to the most dangerous wolf in the entire northern region. Heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs outside her door. Shouts filled the corridors as her packmates realized what was happening. Alpha Garrett's voice boomed through the building, calling for guards, for weapons, for anyone brave enough to face the exile who had dared to set foot on claimed territory. But Ronan Valor was not coming for a fight. 3 gentle knocks sounded on her door. "Miss," came a deep voice from the other side, rough with exhaustion and something that might have been hope. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Mira looked down at the pup, who was gazing up at her with those 2 intelligent eyes. She could hear footsteps thundering through the pack house as her companions rushed to respond to the threat. In moments, there would be violence, blood, death perhaps if Ronan Valor decided to take his child by force, unless she opened the door. "Miss," the voice came again, and this time she could hear the carefully controlled desperation beneath the politeness. "Please, I know you cared for him. I can smell your kindness on his fur. I'm not here to hurt you." The pup whined softly and crawled toward the door, its tail wagging with obvious recognition. It wanted to go to its father. Mira's heart clenched with loss, but she knew what she had to do. She opened the door. Ronan Valor stood in her narrow doorway like a force of nature barely contained. Up close, he was even more imposing, tall enough that his head nearly brushed the frame, broad enough that his shoulders blocked out most of the hallway beyond. The scent of pine and winter storms rolled off him, wild and clean and utterly masculine, but his eyes were fixed on the pup at her feet, and the expression on his harsh features was one of pure, overwhelming relief. "Kieran," he breathed, dropping to one knee as the little wolf tumbled toward him with happy yips. "My boy." The reunion was brief, but intense. Ronan gathered his son against his chest, murmuring words in a language Mira did not recognize while the pup covered his face with tiny licks. For a moment, the dangerous exile looked like nothing more than a father reunited with his missing child. Then he looked up at her, and those golden eyes burned with an intensity that made her knees weak. "You saved him," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You fed him, cared for him, kept him warm." She started to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "I couldn't just leave him to die." Something shifted in his expression, a recognition that made her breath catch. "No," he said slowly, studying her face as if memorizing every detail. "You couldn't. That's not who you are." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. Alpha Garrett's voice boomed closer now, demanding answers, calling for his guards. In moments, they would burst through that doorway with weapons drawn and violence in their hearts. Ronan rose slowly, his son cradled protectively in one powerful arm. But instead of turning to face the approaching threat, he extended his free hand toward Mira. "Come with me," he said. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Mira stared at Ronan's outstretched hand, her mind reeling with the impossibility of what he was asking. Leave? With him? With the most dangerous wolf in the Northern Territories, the exile whose very name made grown alphas lock their doors at night. Behind her, she could hear Alpha Garrett's voice growing closer, filled with rage and fear in equal measure. Find him. Find the exile. And find out how he got past our borders. I can't, she whispered, even as every instinct in her body screamed at her to take his hand and run. This is my pack, my home. Ronan's golden eyes flickered with something that might have been understanding, but his hand remained steady. Is it? He asked quietly. When was the last time anyone in this pack showed you kindness? When did they last treat you as anything more than a servant to be ignored and scorned? The words hit like physical blows, because they were true, brutally, painfully true. But leaving meant abandoning everything she had ever known, even if that everything had never truly wanted her. They'll kill you if you stay, she said, her voice barely audible. Alpha Garrett won't let this insult stand. You came onto his territory to retrieve my son, Ronan interrupted, his voice hardening. A son who would have died if not for your kindness. Do you think I care about territorial disputes when my heir's life was at stake? The pup, Kieran, made a soft sound from his father's arms, looking between them with those impossibly intelligent eyes. As if sensing the tension, he let out a small whine and reached one tiny paw toward Mira. Her heart clenched. Even this baby wolf, barely old enough to walk properly, showed her more affection than her own packmates ever had. Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. Voices shouted orders, and she could hear the metallic scrape of weapons being drawn. They were out of time. Choose now, Ronan said, urgency creeping into his tone. Stay and face their anger for harboring the exile's child, or come with me and discover what it means to be valued for who you are, not despite it. Mira looked around her small room one last time. The narrow bed where she had spent so many lonely nights. The single window that had been her only view of the wider world. The sparse possessions that represented the sum total of her existence in this pack. There was nothing here worth saving, nothing here that would mourn her absence. She took his hand. The moment their skin touched, electricity shot up her arm like lightning. Ronan's eyes flared with surprise, and she gasped at the intensity of the connection. It felt like recognition, like coming home, like finding a missing piece of herself she hadn't even known was lost. Impossible, he breathed, staring down at their joined hands. But there was no time to examine the strange reaction. The door to her room exploded inward as Alpha Garrett and 6 of his strongest warriors burst through. They were armed with silver-edged weapons, their eyes blazing with fury and righteous anger. Release her, exile, Garrett snarled, his massive frame filling the doorway. You have no right to be on my land, no right to touch my wolves. Ronan moved with fluid grace, placing himself between Mira and the armed men, while somehow managing to keep Kieran secure in one arm. Your wolf? He said, his voice dangerously soft. When did you start caring about the well-being of those you cast aside? She's a member of this pack, one of the warriors said, stepping forward with his weapon raised. She belongs here. A bitter laugh escaped Mira's throat before she could stop it. Belong? She said, finding her voice for perhaps the first time in years. When have any of you ever made me feel like I belonged? When have you treated me as anything more than a burden to be endured? Alpha Garrett's face darkened. You're overwrought. This exile has confused you with his dark magic. There's no magic here, Ronan interrupted, his free hand moving to rest protectively on Mira's shoulder. Only truth. She chooses to leave because you've given her no reason to stay. The touch sent another jolt of that strange electricity through her system, and Mira had to bite back a gasp. What was happening to her? She had never felt anything like this, never experienced such an instant and overwhelming connection to another being. She's defective, Marcus called out from behind the Alpha, his young voice cruel with satisfaction. A broken Omega who can't even shift. Why would the great Ronan Valor want damaged goods? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ronan went absolutely still, and when he spoke, his voice carried the rumble of an approaching storm. What did you say? She can't shift, Marcus repeated, apparently too stupid to recognize mortal danger when it was staring him in the face. Failed her first transformation 5 years ago. She's not even a real wolf. Something shifted in the air around them. a pressure that made Mira's ears pop. Ronan's scent intensified, becoming sharp with rage and something else, something protective and fierce that made her wolf, dormant though it was, stir restlessly beneath her skin. Not a real wolf, Ronan repeated, each word precisely enunciated and deadly as a blade. You've spent 5 years convincing a young woman that she's broken because she doesn't conform to your narrow expectations of what she should be. He turned to look at Mira then, and the expression in his golden eyes was so gentle it made her heart ache. Has anyone ever told you why some wolves are late to shift? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Because they're waiting, he said softly. Waiting for the right moment, the right catalyst, the right reason to embrace their true nature. The most powerful wolves often shift last because their spirits know they need to be ready for what they're meant to become. Hope bloomed in her chest, fragile and terrifying. You think I might still? I think, Ronan said, his thumb stroking across her knuckles in a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes, that you've been surrounded by fools who couldn't recognize strength when it was standing right in front of them. Alpha Garrett stepped forward, his face twisted with fury. Enough of this nonsense. Release my pack member and leave my territory or face the consequences. Ronan's laugh was like winter wind through bare trees, cold and sharp and utterly without humor. Your pack member? 5 minutes ago she was hauling your dirty dishes and sleeping alone in a servant's quarters. Now suddenly she's precious to you? She's under my protection. She's under mine now. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Mira felt the shift in the room's dynamics, saw the way the warriors tightened their grips on their weapons and prepared for violence. Blood would be spilled here, and it would be her fault for taking in a lost pup and showing it kindness. Stop, she said, stepping forward despite Ronan's protective stance. Please, I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me. Too late for that, girl, Alpha Garrett snarled. You've harbored the Exile's spawn and aided his trespass on Packland. There will be consequences. Fear spiked through her, but before she could respond, Ronan moved with liquid speed. One moment he was standing beside her, the next he had closed the distance to Alpha Garrett and had the larger man pinned against the wall with one hand around his throat. Kieran, somehow, remained perfectly secure in the crook of his other arm. If you threaten her again, Ronan said in a voice like velvet over steel, I will show you exactly why the Council of Alphas needed 6 packs working together to bring me down. And unlike them, you don't have the numbers or the cunning to make it a fair fight. Garrett clawed at the hand around his throat, his face turning purple. The other warriors surged forward, but froze when Ronan's gaze flicked toward them. There was something primordial in those golden eyes, something that spoke of ancient power and barely leashed violence. Choose your next words very carefully, Ronan advised, releasing his grip just enough to let the Alpha breathe. Because I'm discovering that I have very strong feelings about people who mistreat what's mine. She's not yours, Garrett gasped. Isn't she? Ronan glanced back at Mira, and she felt that strange connection flare between them again. Tell me, little wolf, do you feel the pull? She did. God help her. She did feel it. A tugging sensation deep in her chest, as if some invisible thread connected her to this dangerous, powerful man. It was impossible, unprecedented, but undeniably real. I don't understand, she whispered. You will, he promised, releasing Alpha Garrett and stepping back. The pack leader slumped against the wall, rubbing his bruised throat and glaring with impotent rage. But first, we need to leave. This place has nothing more to offer you. Where will you take her? Garrett demanded, apparently unable to stop himself from pushing for more information despite having just been nearly strangled. Ronan smiled, and the expression was sharp enough to cut glass. Somewhere she'll be appreciated for her strength, instead of scorned for her differences. Somewhere she'll learn what it means to be valued. He extended his hand to Mira again. Last chance, little wolf. Choose your path. Mira looked around the room one final time, at Alpha Garrett's furious face, at Marcus's sneer, at the warriors who had never once stood up for her when she was being tormented by their packmates, at the life of servitude and loneliness that stretched ahead of her if she stayed. Then she looked at Ronan, at the man who had called her strong, who had suggested her delayed shifting might be a sign of power rather than weakness, at the father who had traveled into enemy territory to retrieve his lost child and found something, someone, worth protecting, at the hand that promised escape from everything that had made her feel small and broken. "I choose freedom," she said, and placed her palm against his. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Power rushed through her like molten gold, burning away years of doubt and self-loathing. Her wolf, silent for so long she had begun to think it didn't exist, suddenly roared to life within her chest. She gasped as her bones began to ache, as her skin tingled with the promise of transformation. Ronan's eyes widened with something that looked like reverence. "There you are," he murmured, his fingers tightening around hers. "I knew you were in there." The change swept through her like wildfire. Her spine arched as bones lengthened and reformed. Her hands contorted as claws emerged from her fingertips. Her jaw stretched as teeth sharpened into fangs designed for hunting and survival. And for the first time in her 23 years of life, Mira Ashfall felt complete. The wolf that emerged was not the weak, broken creature her pack had expected. She was silver and black like Kieran, but larger, more elegant, with markings that seemed to shimmer in the lamplight. Her eyes, when she opened them, blazed with an inner fire that had been hidden for far too long.
Alpha Garrett stumbled backward, his face pale with shock. "That's impossible. She's been tested." The pack shaman said, "You're shamans," Ronan said, his voice rough with some emotion Mira couldn't identify. "Are idiots who wouldn't recognize true power if it bit them on the ass." He knelt beside her wolf form, running gentle fingers through her fur. The touch sent shivers of pleasure through her entire body, and she found herself pressing closer to his warmth. "Beautiful," he whispered, and she could hear the awe in his voice. "Absolutely magnificent." Little Kieran wiggled in his father's arms, reaching toward Mira's wolf with excited yips. When she lowered her head, he managed to touch her nose with his tiny paw, and she felt a bond snap into place. Not romantic like whatever was developing between her and Ronan, but familial, protective. This pup was hers to guard now, just as she was his to love. "We need to go," Ronan said, though he seemed reluctant to break the moment. "Before they recover from their shock and remember they have weapons." Mira shifted back to human form, the transformation flowing as naturally as breathing. She was naked, but Ronan immediately shrugged out of his long coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The garment smelled like him, pine and winter storms and safety, and she pulled it closer with a grateful smile. "Thank you," she said, and meant it for more than just the coat. "Thank me when we're safely away from here," he replied, but his eyes were warm. "Can you run?" She nodded, feeling strength flowing through her limbs like she had never experienced before. Her wolf was awake now, eager to stretch its legs and explore the world beyond these confining walls. "Then let's go home," Ronan said, and the word sent a jolt of longing through her chest. Home. She had never had a real home before, never had a place where she belonged, where she was wanted for herself, rather than tolerated out of obligation. Maybe now she would. They moved toward the window, and Ronan gestured for her to go first. Mira climbed onto the sill, looking down at the 2-story drop to the ground below. Her human mind might have hesitated, but her wolf spirit urged her forward with confident grace. She leaped. The landing was perfect, her newly awakened instincts guiding her movements with supernatural precision. A moment later, Ronan dropped beside her with Kieran still secure in his arms, landing without a sound despite his massive size. "This way," he murmured, leading her toward the tree line where shadows waited to swallow them whole. Behind them, Alpha Garrett's voice rose in a bellow of rage. "Stop them. Don't let the exile escape with our pack member." But it was too late. They were already disappearing into the forest, Mira's bare feet finding purchase on ground that suddenly felt as familiar as if she had been born to run through these woods. Her wolf gloried in the freedom, in the speed, in the wild joy of finally being allowed to embrace its true nature. Ronan ran beside her, matching her pace effortlessly, and she realized with a start that he was holding back. Even carrying his son, he could have outdistanced her without effort, but he stayed close, protective and encouraging, letting her set the rhythm of their escape. "Where are we going?" she called out as they leaped over a fallen log. "North," he replied, his voice carrying easily over the sound of their passage. "To my territory. To safety." "How far?" 2 days if we push hard. 3 if we take our time." He glanced over at her, concern flickering across his features. "Are you tired?" Mira took inventory of her body and was amazed to discover that she felt stronger than she ever had in her life. Her legs were steady, her breathing even, her heart pumping with exhilaration rather than exhaustion.
I could run all night, she said, surprised by her own honesty. Ronan's smile was brilliant in the moonlight. Then we will. They ran until dawn, painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. By the time they finally stopped to rest, they had covered an impossible distance, at least 40 miles through difficult terrain that would have challenged even experienced warriors. Mira sank down beside a small stream, cupping the cold water in her hands and drinking deeply. She should have been exhausted, should have been ready to collapse, but instead she felt energized, alive in a way she had never experienced before. Better? Ronan asked, settling Kieran on a soft patch of moss where the pup could drink from the stream's edge. Different, she said honestly. Everything feels different. Stronger. More real somehow. That's your wolf finally being allowed to participate in your life, he explained, sitting down beside her with careful distance between them. She's been suppressed for so long that now she's eager to make up for lost time. Mira studied his profile in the growing light. How did you know? That I could still shift, I mean. Everyone else said it was impossible. Ronan was quiet for a long moment, watching Kieran explore the stream bank with typical puppy curiosity. I could smell it on you, he said finally. The potential. Like a seed waiting for the right conditions to grow. But why didn't anyone else notice? Because they weren't looking for it. They had already decided you were defective, so they saw only what they expected to see. His jaw tightened with old anger. It's easier to dismiss someone than to admit you might have been wrong about them. The words resonated more deeply than they should have. Mira had spent 5 years believing she was broken, accepting the pack's judgment that she was somehow less than everyone else. The revelation that her delayed shifting might actually indicate strength rather than weakness was still too new, too fragile to fully accept. What happens now? She asked. Ronan turned to look at her then, and the intensity in his golden eyes made her breath catch. Now you learn who you really are, what you're truly capable of. Now you discover what it means to be valued for your strength instead of tolerated despite your perceived weaknesses. And you? She asked, though she wasn't sure what answer she was hoping for. What do you get out of helping me? Something flickered across his expression, too quick to interpret, but profound enough to make her pulse skip. Perhaps, he said carefully, I get the chance to discover that not all the good things in my life have been taken from me. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Mira felt that strange connection flare again, stronger now than it had been in her room, like recognition, like destiny, like the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. Little Kieran chose that moment to tumble into the shallow stream with a splash, breaking the tension and making them both laugh. Ronan waded in to rescue his soggy son, and Mira found herself smiling at the picture they made, the feared exile and his precious child, playing in a woodland stream like any ordinary family. Except nothing about this was ordinary. Nothing about Ronan Valor was ordinary, and if she was honest with herself, nothing about her reaction to him was ordinary either. She was 23 years old and had never felt the slightest romantic interest in anyone. Her packmates had always assumed it was another sign of her defectiveness. What kind of wolf didn't crave a mate by her age? But watching Ronan with his son, seeing the gentleness in his powerful hands and the love in his fierce eyes, she finally understood what all the stories were about. The poets who wrote about instant attraction, about souls recognizing their perfect match, about love at first sight, they had been writing about this feeling, this certainty, this sense of coming home to someone she had only just met. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a quiet joy that felt as natural as breathing. Ready to continue? Ronan asked, settling a damp but happy Kieran back in his arms. Mira nodded, rising with easy grace. Her muscles should have been screaming after their long run, but instead they felt loose and ready for more. Her wolf was enjoying this new freedom too much to want to stop. How much farther? She asked as they began moving again, this time at an easier pace that would let them cover ground while conserving energy. We'll reach the boundary of my territory by tonight, Ronan replied. Once we cross that line, we'll be safe. No pack would dare follow us onto my land. Because you're so dangerous? He shot her a look that might have been amused. Because I have friends who are even more dangerous than I am. And because any pack that wants to start a war with me will find they've bitten off considerably more than they can chew. The confidence in his voice was absolute, and Mira found it reassuring rather than arrogant. Whatever else Ronan Valor might be, he was clearly someone who could protect those he chose to shelter. They traveled in comfortable silence for several hours, moving through dense forest and across rolling meadows with the easy rhythm of natural athletes. Kieran dozed in his father's arms, lulled by the steady motion, while Mira marveled at her body's newfound strength and endurance. It was almost noon when they encountered the patrol. Ronan stopped so abruptly that Mira nearly ran into his back. His entire body had gone tense, every muscle coiled for action, and his nostrils flared as he tested the wind. "What is it?" she whispered, though her own newly sharpened senses were already picking up the sense of multiple wolves moving through the forest ahead of them. "Garrett's warriors," Ronan said grimly. "6 of them, trying to cut off our route to the border." Fear spiked through her. "They followed us? Apparently your former alpha is more determined than I gave him credit for." Ronan's jaw tightened. "Or more foolish." Mira looked around frantically, searching for somewhere to hide or an alternate route, but the terrain ahead was too open for concealment and too rough for a quick detour. They were trapped between the approaching patrol and a steep ravine that would be impossible to cross quickly. "I can fight," she said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "My wolf is strong. I can feel it." Ronan turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was a mixture of pride and protective fury. "You've been able to shift for less than 12 hours. You don't know how to fight in wolf form. Then teach me. There's no time." The sounds of the patrol were getting closer now. Mira could hear their voices, low and urgent as they coordinated their search. They would be visible through the trees in minutes. Ronan cursed softly in that foreign language, his eyes darting between the approaching threat and the ravine behind them. "Can you make that jump?" he asked, nodding toward the rocky chasm. Mira assessed the distance, easily 30 feet across and twice that deep. Her human mind said it was impossible, but her wolf spirit stirred with confident certainty. "Yes," she said. "Even carrying Kieran?" She hesitated, then shook her head. The weight of the pup would throw off her balance, and she couldn't risk dropping him into the ravine. "Then we stand and fight," Ronan said, passing his son to her with gentle care. "Take him and run if things go badly. I'm not leaving you." The words came out more forcefully than she had intended, and Ronan's eyes flared with something that looked like surprised gratitude. "Mira, I'm not," she repeated firmly. "We face this together, or we die together. Those are the only options." For a moment he looked like he wanted to argue. Then his expression softened into something that made her heart race. "Together, then," he agreed. The first warrior stepped into the clearing just as they finished speaking. Marcus, the young wolf who had been so cruel to her back at the pack house, his face twisted with malicious satisfaction. "Found them," he called out loudly, and 5 other fighters emerged from the forest to surround them. Alpha Garrett himself was not among them, Mira noticed with relief. These were younger wolves, strong but inexperienced, driven more by pack loyalty and bloodlust than tactical thinking. "Mira Ashfall," Marcus said, his voice dripping with false concern. "You're coming home. Alpha Garrett is willing to forgive your temporary madness, if you return willingly." "I am home," she replied, moving to stand beside Ronan with Kieran secure in her arms. "Right here." The warrior's face darkened. "You've been bewitched by exile magic. But don't worry. Once we kill the beast and his spawn, you'll be free of his influence." Ronan laughed, and the sound was like ice cracking on a frozen lake. 6 pups against 1 exile. "I almost feel sorry for you. We have silver weapons," another warrior said, drawing a gleaming blade that made both Ronan and Mira flinch instinctively. "And the righteous anger of wolves defending their packmate." "You're not defending her," Ronan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "You're trying to drag her back to a life of servitude and scorn. She's finally free, and you want to chain her again. She belongs to our pack. She belongs to herself," Ronan snarled, and his form began to blur as he started to shift. "And I belong to her." The transformation was magnificent and terrifying. Where a man had stood, now crouched a wolf the size of a small horse, with midnight black fur and eyes that burned like golden flames. This was Ronan in his true form, and Mira could see immediately why the Council of Alphas had needed multiple packs to bring him down. He was utterly magnificent. The patrol hesitated, clearly intimidated by the sheer size and presence of their opponent. But Marcus rallied them with sharp words about duty and honor, and they spread out in a fighting formation with their silver weapons gleaming. Mira felt her own wolf surge forward, eager to join the battle, but she forced herself to remain human. Kieran needed protection, and she was still too inexperienced to fight effectively while guarding a pup. The first warrior rushed Ronan from the left, his blade cutting a silver arc through the air, but the exile was no longer where the weapon expected him to be. He moved with liquid grace, faster than anything that large should have been able to move, and his massive jaws closed around the attacker's sword arm. The man's scream echoed through the forest, as bones crunched beneath those powerful teeth. The silver blade fell harmlessly to the ground as Ronan released his grip and spun to face the next threat. 2 more warriors attacked simultaneously, trying to use their numbers advantage. But Ronan was a force of nature in wolf form, all deadly efficiency and predatory instinct. He caught one man across the chest with claws that opened 4 parallel furrows through leather armor and flesh. The other managed to graze his shoulder with a silver blade, before a backhand swipe sent him flying into a tree with bone-jarring impact. "He's too strong," one of the remaining fighters shouted. "We need to retreat." But Marcus was beyond reason, driven by humiliation and rage. "Kill the pup!" he screamed, pointing his silver dagger at Mira and Kieran. "If we can't take her home, at least we can eliminate the exile's heir." Horror flooded through Mira as she realized what he intended. Marcus was going to murder an innocent baby to hurt Ronan, and there was nothing she could do to stop him while holding Kieran. Except there was. For the first time in her life, Mira embraced her wolf completely. She let the transformation flow through her like wildfire, bones reshaping and muscles expanding with preternatural speed. But instead of dropping Kieran during the change, she somehow managed to shift around him, her wolf form naturally creating a protective cage with her body. The little pup found himself riding on her back as she launched herself at Marcus with a snarl of pure fury. She had never fought before in her life, but her wolf knew what to do. Her jaws closed around Marcus's wrist as he raised his dagger, and she tasted silver and blood as her teeth found their mark. The weapon tumbled from nerveless fingers as she bore him to the ground with the weight of her attack. "Incredible," she heard Ronan breathe from somewhere behind her, but she was too focused on the threat in front of her to fully process his words. Marcus tried to throw her off, but she was stronger than either of them had expected. Her newly awakened wolf was magnificent, all silver and black power, and she pinned him to the ground with ease. The remaining warriors took one look at the 2 enormous wolves standing over their fallen packmates, and apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor. They grabbed their wounded companions and fled back toward their own territory with undignified haste. Mira shifted back to human form slowly, her heart still racing with adrenaline and protective fury. Kieran tumbled safely onto the soft grass, completely unharmed and apparently delighted by his first ride on a wolf's back. "That was," Ronan began, then trailed off as if he couldn't find adequate words. "Terrifying," Mira finished for him, wrapping his coat around herself again. "I've never fought anyone before. I didn't know if I could." "Not terrifying," he interrupted, moving closer. "Amazing. You were protecting Kieran, so your wolf channeled every instinct she had toward that goal. You fought like you'd been doing it your entire life." The admiration in his voice made warmth bloom in her chest. "I almost dropped him during the shift. I was so scared. But you didn't. You found a way to transform while keeping him safe. Do you have any idea how much control that requires? How much natural ability?" Mira looked down at Kieran, who was now chasing a butterfly with typical puppy enthusiasm, apparently none the worse for his adventure. "I just knew I couldn't let anything happen to him. Because he's yours now," Ronan said softly. "Just like you're ours." The words sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold. "Ours." Ronan stepped closer, his golden eyes intense. "You saved his life. You protected him when he was vulnerable. In the old laws, that makes you as much his family as blood would." "And you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What does it make me to you?" He reached out to cup her face in his large, warm hands. "Everything," he said simply. "It makes you everything." Then his lips were on hers, and Mira's world exploded into sensation. The kiss was gentle but profound, full of promise and recognition, and something that felt like destiny finally clicking into place. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ronan rested his forehead against hers. "Come home with me," he whispered. "Really home this time, where you'll be cherished and protected and valued for exactly who you are." Mira looked into his golden eyes and saw her future reflected there, not the lonely, scorned existence she had been living, but something bright and full of possibility. "Yes," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Take me home." Chapter 3. The boundary of Ronan's territory was marked not by walls or gates, but by an unmistakable shift in the very air itself. Mira felt it the moment they crossed the invisible line, a settling in her bones, a sense of rightness that made her wolf purr with contentment. The forest here was different too, wilder and more alive, as if the trees themselves recognized the power of the wolf who ruled this land. "We're safe now," Ronan said, and she could hear the relief in his voice. He had been tense for the past several hours, constantly checking their back trail and scenting the wind for signs of pursuit. Now his shoulders relaxed as he shifted Kieran to a more comfortable position. The little pup had been remarkably good-natured about the long journey, dozing for most of the afternoon, and only occasionally stirring to nuzzle against his father's chest. "It feels different here," Mira observed, looking around with curious eyes. The trees were taller, their branches forming a cathedral-like canopy overhead. Wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion along the forest floor, their colors more vivid than anything she had seen in Alpha Garrett's territory. Even the quality of light seemed richer, golden and warm despite the approaching evening. "The land responds to its alpha," Ronan explained. "When a wolf is truly bonded to his territory, it reflects his spirit. Garrett's lands were harsh because he ruled through fear and intimidation. This place," he gestured around them with obvious pride, "this place knows it is loved." They walked in comfortable silence for another hour, following a well-worn path that wound between massive oak trees and across babbling streams. Mira marveled at the abundance of life around them. Squirrels chattering in the branches, deer grazing peacefully in sunny clearings, birds singing complex melodies that seemed almost like music. It was as if they had stepped into a fairy tale, a place where harmony reigned between predator and prey. "There," Ronan said suddenly, pointing ahead. "Home." Mira followed his gaze and gasped at what she saw. Nestled in a natural clearing beside a crystal-clear lake stood the most beautiful structure she had ever laid eyes on. It wasn't a mansion or a palace, but something more organic, a sprawling lodge built from honey-colored logs and river stones, with wide verandas and tall windows that caught the last rays of sunlight. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and warm light spilled from every opening, making the entire building glow like a welcoming beacon. "It's magnificent," she breathed. "It's home," Ronan said simply, but she could hear the deep satisfaction in his voice. "Built with my own hands over the past 3 years. Every log cut from trees that fell naturally, every stone gathered from the lake shore. It's exactly what I wanted. A place where power doesn't need to be displayed because it simply is." As they approached the lodge, Mira became aware of movement in the shadows around them. Not threatening, but watchful. She caught glimpses of wolves padding through the underbrush, some in human form, some not, all keeping pace with their alpha's return. They were larger than average, she noticed, and carried themselves with the confident grace of warriors who had never known defeat. "Your pack?" she asked quietly. "My family," Ronan corrected. "Wolves who chose to follow me into exile rather than submit to the council's puppets. The strongest, the most loyal, the ones who understand that true leadership is earned through respect, not fear." A massive wolf emerged from the trees ahead of them, padding silently across their path, before shifting into a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver-streaked hair and intelligent gray eyes. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew his place and was content with it. "Marcus," Ronan said warmly, and Mira had to suppress a flinch at the name. It would take time to stop associating it with the cruel young wolf who had tried to kill Kieran. "This is Mira. She saved Kieran's life." The man, Marcus, studied her with those penetrating gray eyes, and Mira fought the urge to fidget under his scrutiny. There was no hostility in his gaze, but she sensed he was taking her measure with the thoroughness of someone whose job it was to evaluate potential threats. "The lost pup we've been searching for," he said finally, his voice a warm baritone. "We began to fear the worst when he didn't come home." Ronan's jaw tightened. "He wandered too far during a hunting lesson. By the time I tracked his scent to the border, he'd been gone for 2 days. If Mira hadn't found him." "But she did," Marcus said, his expression softening as he looked at her. "And for that, you have the gratitude of every wolf in this pack. Kieran is precious to us all." As if summoned by his name, the little pup stirred in his father's arms and let out a happy yip. Marcus grinned and reached out to tickle Kieran's belly, earning a delighted giggle that sounded remarkably human, despite coming from a wolf throat. "The others will want to see him," Marcus said, "and meet the woman who brought him home." Anxiety spiked through Mira's chest. Meeting one new wolf was manageable, but facing an entire pack? What if they saw her as an outsider, an intruder who didn't belong? What if they resented her presence in their territory? As if sensing her distress, Ronan moved closer, his warmth a reassuring presence at her side. "They'll love you," he said quietly. "Just as I—" He stopped abruptly, color rising in his cheeks, and cleared his throat. "Just as anyone would who gets to know you." The near slip made Mira's heart race, but she pushed the reaction aside. It was too soon for such feelings, too complicated given everything that had happened. She barely knew this man, even if her wolf seemed convinced he was exactly where she belonged. They climbed the wide steps to the lodge's main entrance, where carved wooden doors stood open to welcome them home. The interior was as beautiful as the exterior had promised, all warm wood and soft leather, with tapestries on the walls and rugs scattered across polished floors. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames dancing merrily in its depths and casting dancing shadows across the comfortable furniture arranged nearby. But it was the wolves gathered in the great room that took Mira's breath away. There were perhaps 20 of them, all in human form, ranging in age from teenagers to gray-haired elders. They were beautiful, every one of them, with the kind of natural grace and confidence that spoke of wolves who had never doubted their place in the world, and they were all looking at her. Silence fell as Ronan stepped into the room with Mira at his side. She could feel their eyes evaluating her, taking in her borrowed coat and bare feet, her tangled hair, and the scent of another pack that still clung to her skin. Heat rose in her cheeks as she fought the urge to hide behind Ronan's broad shoulders. Then a young woman with auburn hair and warm brown eyes stepped forward with a welcoming smile. "You must be Mira," she said, extending her hands in a gesture of friendship. "I'm Elena. We've all been so worried about little Kieran." The genuine warmth in her voice broke through Mira's anxiety, and she found herself smiling in return. "He's a brave little wolf, stronger than he looks." "All Valor males are," said an older woman from near the fireplace, her silver hair gleaming in the firelight. "Stubborn as rocks and twice as hard-headed. It's lucky for them they're charming enough to make up for it." Laughter rippled through the room, and some of the tension in Mira's shoulders eased. These wolves weren't examining her with hostility. They were simply curious about the woman who had brought their alpha's son home safely. "This is Vera," Ronan said, affection clear in his voice as he gestured toward the older woman. "She practically raised me after my parents died. Still thinks she can boss me around." "Because I can," Vera retorted with a grin. "And because someone needs to keep you from doing anything too foolish." Her sharp eyes fixed on Mira with obvious interest. "Though rescuing lost pups is exactly the kind of foolishness I can support." More introductions followed. Marcus, the second in command, Elena, the pack healer, Thomas, the master tracker, Sarah, the weapons trainer. Each wolf welcomed Mira with genuine kindness, though she noticed they kept a respectful distance. They could smell the mate bond beginning to form between her and Ronan, she realized, and were giving them space to explore it naturally. The thought should have embarrassed her, but instead it filled her with a warm glow of belonging. These wolves accepted that she might become part of their family. They weren't questioning her worth, or demanding she prove herself. They were simply waiting to see what would develop. "You must be exhausted," Elena said after the initial round of greetings had concluded. "When did you last eat? Sleep properly?" The questions made Mira realize just how tired she actually was. The adrenaline that had carried her through their escape and the long journey was beginning to fade, leaving her aware of every ache in her muscles and the gnawing hunger in her belly. "I'm fine," she started to say, but Ronan cut her off with a gentle but firm shake of his head. "You're dead on your feet," he said, studying her face with concern. "Elena's right. You need food and rest." "I'll prepare a room," Vera said briskly, already moving toward the stairs. "Something comfortable and private where she can recover properly." "Actually," Ronan said, his voice carefully neutral, "I was thinking she might prefer the blue suite. It has the best view of the lake, and it's close to my quarters, in case she needs anything during the night." The slight emphasis on the last part made several pack members exchange knowing looks, and Mira felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Were they really discussing sleeping arrangements in front of everyone? "The blue suite is perfect," Elena said diplomatically. Very comfortable and well-appointed. You'll love it, Mira. I don't want to impose, Mira said quickly. I'm grateful for any space you can spare. You're not imposing, Ronan interrupted, his golden eyes intense. You're home now. This is your pack, your family, your place to belong. Never apologize for taking up space here. The words hit her like a physical blow, so kind and accepting that she felt tears spring to her eyes. Home, family, belonging. Concepts she had dreamed of but never dared to hope for. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ronan's expression softened impossibly. Come on, he said gently. Let's get you settled. Kieran needs his dinner too, and I suspect all three of us could use some quiet time. He led her up a graceful staircase to the second floor, down a hallway lined with beautiful artwork and family photographs. The blue suite turned out to be a spacious bedroom with an attached sitting area, decorated in soothing shades of blue and cream. French doors opened onto a private balcony that overlooked the lake, where moonlight was just beginning to dance on the water's surface. It's beautiful, Mira said, moving to the doors and gazing out at the peaceful scene. So peaceful. My room is just through there, Ronan said, gesturing to a connecting door she hadn't noticed. If you need anything at all during the night, food, water, extra blankets, or just someone to talk to, don't hesitate to knock. The connecting door felt significant somehow, like a bridge between their two worlds. Not an invasion of privacy, but an invitation to closeness when she was ready for it. Ronan, she said, turning to face him. He was standing near the main door with Kieran in his arms, and something about his posture suggested he was reluctant to leave. Thank you for everything, for saving me, for bringing me here, for making me feel welcome. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. His eyes flashed with something that might have been pain. You don't owe me anything, Mira. What I did was selfish as much as generous. Selfish? He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if memorizing every detail. From the moment I saw you in that window, holding my son like he was precious cargo, I knew you were special, and when I touched your hand, he shook his head as if still not quite believing what had happened. I haven't felt anything like that in my entire life. Mira's heart began to race. What are you saying? I'm saying that bringing you here wasn't just about gratitude or kindness. It was about need, about recognition, about the fact that my wolf took one look at you and decided you were ours. He paused, then added more quietly, I should have told you that before we left your pack's territory. Should have given you the chance to make an informed decision about coming with me. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Mira felt her own wolf stir restlessly, responding to the need she heard in his voice with an answering call of her own. And if you had told me? She asked. What do you think I would have said? Ronan's smile was rueful. Probably that I was crazy, that we'd known each other for less than an hour, that mate bonds don't form that quickly between strangers. You're right, she said, stepping closer to him. I probably would have said all of those things. His face fell slightly, but before he could respond, she continued. But I would have come with you anyway, because crazy or not, impossible or not, I felt it too. That recognition, that sense of rightness, that feeling of finally finding something I didn't even know I was looking for. Hope blazed in his golden eyes. Mira, I'm not saying we should rush into anything, she said quickly, nervous about the intensity of his gaze. This is all very new and overwhelming, and I need time to figure out who I am now that I can finally shift. But I want to explore this connection between us. I want to see what we could become together. Ronan nodded slowly, though she could see the effort it took for him to restrain his wolf's more impatient instincts. We'll take it at whatever pace feels right to you. No pressure, no expectations. Just possibility. Possibility, she repeated, liking the sound of the word. I can work with possibility. Little Kieran chose that moment to demand attention with a series of increasingly indignant yips, making them both laugh. The tension in the room eased, becoming something warmer and more comfortable. I should feed him, Ronan said, though he seemed reluctant to leave, and let you get some rest. Elena will bring up some food for you shortly. Will I see you tomorrow? The question slipped out before Mira could stop it, revealing more eagerness than she had intended. Ronan's smile was brilliant. Try to keep me away. After he left, Mira explored her new quarters more thoroughly. Someone, probably Vera, had already stocked the armoire with clothes in her size, though how they had managed that so quickly was beyond her understanding. The bathroom was luxurious, with a deep soaking tub that called to every aching muscle in her body. Elena arrived shortly after with a tray of food that made Mira's mouth water: roasted chicken with herbs, fresh bread still warm from the oven, vegetables that had clearly been harvested that day from their own gardens. There was also a steaming mug of tea that smelled like chamomile and honey. "Vera's special blend," Elena explained with a grin. "Guaranteed to help you sleep peacefully. She makes it for anyone who's had a particularly stressful day." They chatted while Mira ate, Elena sharing stories about the pack and their life in this hidden territory. It seemed like paradise. Wolves living in harmony with nature and each other, pursuing their own interests and talents without the rigid hierarchies Mira was used to. "It wasn't always like this," Elena said when Mira commented on the peaceful atmosphere. "When we first arrived, everyone was angry and bitter about the exile. We'd lost everything: our homes, our status, our connections to the wider wolf community. But Ronan helped us see that we'd actually gained something more valuable: the freedom to be ourselves without political pressure or social expectations." "He's an extraordinary leader," Mira observed. "He's an extraordinary man," Elena corrected gently. "Leadership is just one of his gifts. Wait until you see how he is with children, or watch him tend the garden, or hear him play the piano. There's so much more to him than the dangerous exile reputation he carries." The words painted a picture of complexity that intrigued Mira. She had seen glimpses of Ronan's gentleness with Kieran, but the idea that there were entire facets of his personality she had yet to discover was thrilling rather than daunting. After Elena left, Mira ran herself a hot bath and sank into the fragrant water with a sigh of pure bliss. Her muscles relaxed for what felt like the first time in days, and she let her mind drift as the warmth seeped into her bones. She was safe. For the first time in her adult life, she was truly safe. No one here would mock her for her late shifting or treat her like a burden to be endured. No one would assign her the worst jobs or exclude her from pack activities. She was welcome here, valued here, wanted here. And Ronan, the thought of him sent warmth curling through her belly that had nothing to do with the hot water. He was unlike anyone she had ever met: powerful but gentle, dangerous but protective, confident but not arrogant. When he looked at her, she felt like the most important person in the world. Was this what it felt like to be cherished? This giddy combination of safety and excitement, comfort and anticipation? She was still contemplating the question when she finally climbed out of the tub and wrapped herself in the softest robe she had ever felt. The bed was equally luxurious, with sheets that felt like silk against her skin and pillows that cradled her head perfectly. As she drifted toward sleep, she could hear the sounds of the pack settling in for the night. Quiet conversations, soft laughter, the gentle closing of doors. It was so different from the rigid silence that had characterized her old pack's evening routine. Here, people actually seemed to enjoy each other's company. A soft knock on the connecting door made her pulse skip. "Come in," she called softly. Ronan appeared in the doorway, now dressed in simple dark pants and a white shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He carried a sleepy Kieran in his arms, the little pup's belly round with milk and contentment. "I wanted to say goodnight," he said quietly, "and to check that you have everything you need." "More than I need," she said honestly. "This is the most beautiful room I've ever slept in." "Good." His gaze was warm as it traveled over her face. "You deserve beautiful things, Mira. Comfort and luxury and all the small pleasures you've been denied." The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. "Ronan, sleep well," he said, stepping back before she could finish whatever she had been about to say. "Tomorrow I'll show you the rest of our territory. I think you'll love the gardens especially. They're Vera's pride and joy." After he left, Mira lay in the soft darkness and listened to the quiet sounds from the next room: running water, soft footsteps, the creak of a bed frame as Ronan settled Kieran for the night. Knowing he was so close filled her with a contentment she had never experienced before. She was almost asleep when she heard it, a soft whimpering from the next room, followed by Ronan's gentle voice as he comforted his son. The little pup must be having nightmares about his time lost in the forest, reliving the fear and hunger he had endured. Without thinking, Mira slipped out of bed and padded to the connecting door. She knocked softly, then pushed it open when Ronan's voice invited her in. His room was larger than hers, but decorated in similar earth tones, dominated by a massive bed where he sat with Kieran cradled against his chest. The little wolf was still whimpering softly, his tiny body trembling with distress. "Bad dreams?" she asked quietly. Ronan nodded, his face creased with worry. "He keeps waking up scared. I think being lost affected him more than I realized." Mira approached the bed slowly, extending her hand toward Kieran's small form. "May I?" When Ronan nodded, she gently stroked the pup's fur, murmuring the same soft words she had used the night she found him. Almost immediately, Kieran's trembling eased, and his whimpering faded to quiet snuffles. "You have a gift with him," Ronan said wonderingly. "He trusts you completely." "I understand what it feels like to be afraid and alone," she replied simply. "Sometimes that's all anyone needs. Someone who understands." They sat together in comfortable silence, both focused on the little wolf sleeping peacefully between them. In the dim lamplight, the scene felt intimate and domestic, in a way that made Mira's heart ache with longing. This could be her life, this feeling of being needed and valued, of being part of something larger than herself, this sense of family and belonging and home. "Stay," Ronan said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Just until he's sleeping deeply. I don't want to risk waking him by moving him to his own bed." Mira knew she should return to her own room, should maintain some distance while they figured out what was developing between them. But Kieran's peaceful breathing and Ronan's warm presence were too tempting to resist. She settled onto the bed beside them, careful to maintain a respectful distance while still being close enough to comfort the pup if needed. The mattress was incredibly comfortable, and the warmth radiating from Ronan's body made her feel safer than she had ever felt in her life. "Thank you," he said softly. "For this, for everything. I know bringing you here complicates things for you." "Complications can be good," she murmured, already half asleep. "They mean life is interesting." She felt rather than saw his smile. "Then I promise you a very interesting life, Mira Ashfall." The words followed her into sleep, wrapping around her like a promise of all the possibilities that lay ahead. For the first time in 23 years, Mira fell asleep feeling completely and utterly at peace. In the morning, she would wake to find herself still on Ronan's bed, with Kieran curled against her side, and Ronan's protective arm curved around them both. She would see the way he looked at her in the golden morning light, like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe was real, and know that whatever else the future held, she had finally found where she belonged. But for now, she simply slept, safe in the knowledge that she was home at last. The Omega who had been denied by her pack had found her Alpha. The lost pup had brought them together. And in the morning, their real story would finally begin. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.